pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Dr. Merrill Matthews.
And welcome to Point of View. I'm Merrill Matthews, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. And we've got a great show for you, especially if you're interested in history. In the first hour, we'll look at the 1619 Project. Now, this began as a New York Times Magazine effort in August 2019. That was the 400th anniversary of a ship arriving in Virginia with some 20 slaves. It set off a national debate, including a book in 2021 about the role of slavery in the country and its history and how it affects us and what it means. And it's sort of, there was just so much debate going on about it. We talked about it here several times on Point of View. My guest for this hour, Dr. Phillip W. Magness. He's a senior fellow at the Independent Institute and the David J. Thoreau Chair in Political Economy. He's the author of the new book we're going to be looking at, The 1619 Project Myth. He has served as a senior research fellow at the American Institute for Economic Research and as academic program director at the Institute for Humane Studies and adjunct professor of public policy at the School of Public Policy at George Mason University, where he got his PhD. Dr. Magness, thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here.
All right. So start us off here, the 1619 Project. Tell us a little bit about how this whole project got started, why the New York Times wanted to do it, a little bit about Hannah Jones, Nicole Hannah Jones, who sort of led the charge. Tell us, how did we get here with this project?
Well, that's the interesting thing, because I remember back in August of 2019 when I was eating my breakfast, and I usually read all the major newspapers in the morning, and I opened up the New York Times' website, and I saw the new project that they had just announced, the 1619 Project. And it was pitched as a reinvestigation of slavery's role across the long arc of American history. And I'm reading this, and I was originally actually somewhat excited about it, because the New York Times had a history of doing special series to commemorate anniversaries and events in the past. Mm-hmm. And the most recent one before that, they did the 150th anniversary of the American Civil War, which was 2011 to 2015. And they produced this great little series called Disunion. And what it was like a day-by-day historical commentary recounting the events of the Civil War. And it had hundreds of contributors from across the history profession and all sorts of other academics. But it was a really well-done, interesting series. I wrote a few pieces for it, and I saw the 1619 Project. And I thought, well, okay, they're doing something very interesting again. And then I started to read it and found that it had a completely different tone and flavor. It was very political in its arguments, and after I got to about the second essay in it, it became very clear that they were arguing for a left-wing redistributive political agenda in the present day, but they were basically using the past as a tool to argue for that. So it was a very different flavor.
What was their basic claim? What were they trying to make?
Yeah, so they start out by arguing that this date, 1619, is a major event in American history, and I don't think anyone could dispute that, because it's when the first slave ship arrives off of the coast of Jamestown. Mm-hmm. So it is the starting point of slavery in America. But they take it several steps beyond that. And Nicole Hannah Jones, in her opening essay, she announced that she basically wanted to displace 1776 and replace it with 1619 as the true founding date of America. And you think about the philosophical implications of that. That basically says that America is founded primarily around this institution of slavery, and everything that's existed since then is tainted by it. So she takes that as the starting point, and then she walks through an argument about the American Revolution, the events in 1776, and she tries to recast them as a revolution to defend slavery from the British. which is just completely ahistorical. It takes small kernels of history and just distorts them to unrecognizable proportions, and comes up with this claim, basically, that we declared our independence to get away from Britain to protect and prop up the wealth that was coming in from slavery. And then they go from a step further from that. So the next essay by Matthew Desmond argues that slavery is the engine that basically drives the American part of the Industrial Revolution, and America's wealth and position in the world today is therefore tainted by and derivative of slavery, and that gets them to the end game. The end game is all about arguing for reparations and massive economic redistribution, possibly even overthrowing American capitalism, according to some of these essayists, all premised on this notion that slavery is embedded in our founding.
Now, I'm holding up a copy for our viewers online of the book, The 1619 Project. It's called A New Origin Story, and it's I gotta say, Phil, it's a big, thick book, and there's a lot of essays in this book. So she found some cohorts to agree with her.
Yes, she did. But the interesting thing here is most of our cohort, especially in that initial issue from the New York Times, were not historians. They were not even experts in their subject matter. Most of them were editorial journalists, like Nicole Hannah-Jones herself, or she found academics that are much more on the activist side of that. So Matthew Desmond, who's one of the other lead authors, is a sociologist at Princeton University who studies things like income redistribution and poverty today, had never before written an essay on slavery, and yet she tasked him with writing the main 1619 Project chapter on the economics of slavery. So it's a very strange assemblage.
I'm holding up now for our viewers a copy of your book, The 1619 Project Myth. You've got several essays in here. Yours is a much more readable book, not nearly as thick, and I appreciate that. But what's your theme in the book? What are you trying to address there?
Well, I'm trying to bring a reconciliation between the evidence, the historical evidence and scholarship, and this narrative that they're telling, including where it's necessary to be critical of the 1619 Project. It's really to try and write the story of history, saying that we don't need this political narrative in the modern day. Really, we want to get the facts straight. So I walk through and I attempt to be very methodical, but also fair to it in evaluating its historical claims and really dissecting this whole arc about American founding being rooted in slavery, leading all the way up to American wealth today being derivative of slavery.
My guest for this hour is Dr. Phillip Magness. He has written the book, The 1619 Project Myth, published by the Independent Institute. We'll have a link to that on our website if you'd like to find out more about that or get a copy of it. We'd also have a bio of him so you can find out more about him because he's written on a number of topics in his role with the Independent Institute. And Dr. Magness, when we come back, I want to get a sense, you talking there about King Cotton. And King Cotton was a big deal at some time, the idea that cotton was sort of the king of everything. And you sort of address some of this and then some of the things that flow from that about how comprehensive slavery was, how big a role it played in the economy, because that's one of the issues they make, that it was cotton was sort of the key to the U.S. economy in the 1800s. So when we come back, we'll continue our discussion with Dr. Magness and talking about his book, The 1619 Project Myth. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Matt Taibbi worked for many years as a contributing editor for Rolling Stones and is now publisher of Racket News. After the horrible news of the school shooting in Minneapolis Catholic School, he made an insightful comment about the way the media covers such issues. He said, "You don't know who's crazier, the shooter or some of the people talking about the shooter." His comments seem to sum up all the media commentary that occurs after a tragic event like a mass shooting. First, there is the confusion on the part of the legacy media about motive. Certainly, we don't want to jump to false conclusions, but media practitioners generally default to his motive was unclear. Whether it's a mass shooting or a terrorist attack, my quick answer to motive is simple. The shooter wanted to kill people. In the case of the Minnesota shooter, we have clear indications since the gun magazine said such things as "kill Donald Trump," "Israel must fall," and "where is your God?" These might have been an indication of motive. Second, as soon as the tragedy is announced, one side will talk about the need for more gun control, even though Minnesota has more restrictive gun laws and even a red flag law. The other side might focus on mental health issues. A third side might focus on the need for better school security. And a fourth commentary might lament the increasing amount of visual violence in the media. The cacophony of voices and opinions should be clear indication that there are no simple solutions. But that doesn't stop the media and their experts from expressing them long before the funerals for those who have died at the hands of a deranged shooter. We need to acknowledge that there are no simple solutions, and we need to postpone such discussions and debates a few days after the tragedy. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Critical Race Theory, go to viewpoints.info/CRT. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. My guest for this hour, Dr. Phillip W. Magness. He is a senior fellow at the Independent Institute. That is a think tank, a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank. And we're talking about his new book, The 1619 Project Myth, which addresses the 1619 Project that started the issue started in 2019. We've discussed it several times, some of the issues here on Point of View over the years. But Dr. Magness, what is King Cotton? That plays a role in their thinking.
Absolutely. So on the eve of the American Civil War, this is as the abolition movement is heating up, as slavery is becoming this national issue of conflict between the North and the South, the pro-slavery side of that debate started to make this argument on economic terms. They said that the U.S. economy, and indeed the global economy, was so dependent on slave-produced cotton from the South that gave them an advantageous position over everything. That basically made cotton king of the world economy. And therefore, any abolitionist or anyone that questioned slavery was really attacking prosperity, was attacking the engine of the American economy. And it was all premised on this notion that, cotton's a major industry. It's a big export to the rest of the world. Its products go into the textile mills of New England. So they had a very inflated sense of the Southern economy. Now, the issue with this is the Confederacy builds its economic policy around this notion that because it's such an important industry, the rest of the world will come to its help during the Civil War. Britain and France will jump in and join to preserve King Cotton, yet it turns out to be a myth. It just doesn't come true. And in fact, if we do any study of the American Civil War, it's famous that the North had the industrial capacity to win the war, whereas the South is basically kind of like this economic backwater. So that was the theory.
And they were using cotton. They thought the importance of cotton to England would encourage Great Britain to come into on the South side in the war.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the South said, we'll try to lure Great Britain in. We'll offer you advantageous access to our cotton industry. Just come to our aid and join our side of the war. And Britain says, no, we'll just get our cotton elsewhere.
and that worked. I mean, it just they were able to find the cotton elsewhere in time to hurt the economy of the South. Now, you mentioned in there, you talk a good bit about the new history of capitalism. What is the new history of capitalism?
So this is a group of historians, mostly in the Ivy League, who, after the financial crisis in 2008, they decided they were going to launch a new movement in the academic history profession. And it says, we're going to investigate capitalism as a source of social dynamics in the past. And one of the things that they settle on is, let's study slavery. Now, slavery is probably the most heavily researched topic in all of economic history for the United States. It's something that's been going on for generations. There are thousands of papers and books and all sorts of things have been written about it. But the new historians of capitalism, they step into this field and they say basically, we're the first people to really do a rigorous assessment of the economics of slavery. So that was just nonsense itself. But they came in with a political agenda, and that political agenda was not so much connected to race or slavery. It was connected to a broader disdain for capitalism arising out of the financial crisis. These are people kind of on the Marxist or socialist left who just disliked capitalism, and they pulled the trick here. They said, we're going to reinvestigate the history of American capitalism around slavery, and we're going to blame slavery as this original sin of American capitalism. We're going to argue that they're wedded at the hip and joined together. And what the 1619 Project does is, in this essay by Matthew Desmond, is they just copy the new history of capitalism narrative about slavery and about cotton production almost verbatim and use it as a key part of their political narrative that capitalism today is tainted by slavery.
You know, there was some discussion at the time, as I recall, that some of the people in the South said the capitalism that they were exercising in the North was really hurt people because they were trying to minimize the amount of money they pay people. And we here in the South, we take care of our slaves, we provide for them, we provide medicine and so forth. So there was this sort of tension going on between whether or not capitalism is a good form of an economy from both the South and the North at the time.
Absolutely. This is the major economic debate on the eve of the American Civil War is, do we have a free labor economy where people can compete and choose their job, or do we have this, it was presented as a paternalistic slave economy, but it's a really insidious top-down system. And that's what's taking place in the South. And the defenders of slavery in the South said, yes, our plantation system is better. There's this one character by the name of George Fitzhugh who's writing in the 1850s, and he's a prominent pro-slavery theorist, perhaps the most well-known nationwide on the pro-slavery side of the debate. And he writes a book basically declaring that plantations are the most perfect form of socialism that has ever existed because they deliver housing and food and medicine and care to everyone that needs it. And they place order on society. They manage like a top-down mini economy on the plantation that ensures the right goods are produced and delivered for sale. So it's almost like saying the plantation is a mini experiment in socialism. That was Fitzhugh's point, and he contrasts that to the North. He says, well, these free laborers, they have horrible working conditions. They're abused by their bosses. The owners of the factory don't pay them enough. They steal or appropriate the surplus value of their labor. And if you read this thing, and it sounds almost exactly like Karl Marx, just with a pro-slavery spin on it.
You know, my recollection is that in the 1820s and 30s, in that area, Southerners would agree that slavery was a problem, but they didn't know how to get out of it. I mean, you couldn't escape it if you had so much money tied up in the slave property.
That's exactly, and you hear that in the founding generation. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, all these figures that were key in the founding, yes, they were slave owners, but they also recognized that slavery is a problem, and they all predicted that it would eventually come to heads and would need to be abolished. They didn't know how to wean the American economy out of it, and they tried all sorts of plans, but that was the dominant view of the founders. You move a couple of generations later on the eve of the Civil War, and actually the pro-slavery arguments have repudiated the founding and said, no, this is a positive good. It's something we must continue for perpetuity.
You know, the historians there were historians who generally supported Hannah Jones, and I think I mentioned to you in an email that a fair amount of my dissertation was intellectual history in the 19th century South, and so I followed some of these. I'm familiar with these arguments, not to the extent you are, because I'm not an expert and I haven't done it for a while. But some of the historians that have come up in defending her, I'm just amazed. I read some of these things and I think, what are you thinking? That's just not right.
That's exactly it. The way that she went around aggregating supporters for her history. So she gets into trouble really early on after the 1619 Project comes out, and it's really over this claim about displacing the American founding and claiming that the American Revolution is fought over slavery. Well, if you ask, like 99% of mainstream historians will look at that and they'll say this is utter nonsense. Slavery is there in the American founding, but it's a cross-cutting issue. There are pro-slavery and anti-slavery colonists. There are pro-slavery and anti-slavery British. So both sides of the war, slavery's there, but it doesn't become a defining mechanism of why we declare independence. And in fact, the New York Times, when they started publishing the 1619 Project, they asked a well-known historian, Leslie Harris, to be their fact checker. And she revealed after they went to print and published and all this controversy is breaking out, she says, the New York Times asked me to fact check the 1619 Project. I did, and I told them that this claim is just not supported by the historians who study the subject. And then she says they ignored me. Yeah. So this turns out to be like a recurring pattern for Nicole Hannah Jones. Is like she had her narrative, and anyone that told her that it was wrong, she would just ignore it. Well, a little bit later down the road, she has this controversy brewing because several prominent historians of the Revolution have come and said, this is just not right. The facts do not support you. So what she did, instead of making the correction, which is what a responsible journalist does, she turns around and she starts scavenging for footnotes, cherry-picking footnotes of bits and pieces of other historians that she thinks she could prop up her narrative with. This is like the kid that delays and procrastinates on a term paper, and then the night before that it's due, goes on Wikipedia and just cherry-picks the bits and pieces that fits the argument that they want to make. It's not good historical writing, but that's essentially what she did.
It's not good scholarship. My guest for this hour, Dr. Phillip Magness. He is a senior fellow with the Independent Institute. We're talking about his book, The 1619 Project Myth. You can find out more about that book at our website, pointofview.net. We also have a link to it at Amazon, or you can go to the Independent Institute, and I would encourage you to do that because they publish a lot of good work. Stay with us. We'll be back on Point of View.
Point of View has been listener-funded for over 50 years, and listeners who give monthly are the lifeblood of this ministry. And that is why we are inviting you to join that special team, the Truth Team. Later this month, we will celebrate Truth Team Week, highlighting the special impact you make when you become a regular supporter of Point of View. Please pray about the investment you can commit as a monthly gift during Truth Team Week. By supporting Point of View, you equip Americans to remain anchored to truth, navigating the tough moral, cultural, and political issues of the day from a biblical perspective. And also, you don't have to wait. You can join us right now. Give or learn more about the Truth Team at pointofview.net or call us at 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, Dr. Merrill Matthews.
And welcome back to Point of View. My guest, Dr. Phil Magness, and we're talking about his book, The 1619 Project Myth. And Dr. Magness, as I recall, there's one of the claims they made that the revolution was sort of based upon slavery was they felt that the pro-slave South felt that England was beginning to move away from slavery, and they thought, well, if we continue to be a colony of Great Britain, Great Britain's eventually going to end slavery, and that's going to end it here in the United States, and that will be very hard for us. And if I understand that right, that was just crazy thinking.
Absolutely. In that era, in that day and age, the abolition movement in England is very much at its earliest stages. And we know this because there are several attempts in the late 1700s to bring bills before Parliament to ban the slave trade, and they all fail. It's actually in the early 1790s is the start of a concerted push to actually rein in slavery, and it really doesn't take off for another 15 years. It's the same bill being brought up over and over again, and it keeps failing. So this notion that England was on the precipice of starting to abolish slavery in 1776 is just utter nonsense. And the other thing you find out about it is of the major figures in the British political sphere, where do they align on the American Revolution? So one person I mentioned in the book is a member of Parliament by the name of Charles James Fox, and he is on the anti-slavery side. He's actually famous as the person that finally, in 1806, gets that bill through Parliament to abolish the slave trade. But during the American Revolution, he's actually a proponent of the American side. He's advocating on behalf of the colonists to be given greater freedom and self-direction in their affairs. And it's kind of like quietly cheering them on. And meanwhile, you have pro-slavery forces. So one that I mentioned in the book, Cornwallis's cavalry commander on his Carolinas campaign is this character by the name of Bannister Tarleton. And he's actually very notorious as a ruthless cavalry commander, marauding across the Carolinas and raging very aggressive types of warfare. He's also the son of a slave trading family from Liverpool. And after the war, he's pushed out of what's now the United States, goes back to England, and he assumes a seat in Parliament, and he becomes the leading voice of the pro-slavery cause in British Parliament. So these facts are just not adding up with the 1619 Project's narrative that there's like this nascent abolition movement from abroad about to be imposed on the American colonies.
And of course, the year 1775, 76 is when the revolution gets started. And William Wilberforce, who I think many of our listeners will be at least familiar with, didn't even enter politics until 1780. I mean, he's one of the major players in this, but he's just getting started after the revolution.
Absolutely. And so the timeline is a major issue for Nicole Hannah-Jones, because you can actually go back to the 1760s and you find the early figures of the American Revolution when they're just starting to protest the taxes. And most of these are based around Boston, but it's figures like James Otis. Turns out he's also an abolitionist. Your listeners probably know of Thomas Paine, who writes Common Sense. Thomas Paine also writes abolition-minded pamphlets in the colonies. It's a major grievance against the crown that this system of slavery has been enforced upon them from abroad. George Washington denounces this. Thomas Jefferson denounces this. They say that, you impose slavery on us. That's the problem that's coming from the crown. And then you got to, one of the great pieces of evidence, Benjamin Franklin. He's a really obscure figure in the American founding, apparently, to Nicole Hannah-Jones. Benjamin Franklin is also a founder of an abolition society. And one of these events, she says, there's a 1772 court case in London that frees a slave. And she says, there's proof that the British were about to free their slaves. Benjamin Franklin writes a friend after this court case, and he says, this demonstrates the hypocrisy of the crown. They're so proud of themselves for freeing only one slave, they should have freed them all. So it's just the complete inversion of the truth that you find with the narrative that Nicole Hannah-Jones is telling, and all of this is just omitted and written out of the story.
You also discussed a major economic error in trying to figure out how big the slavery economy is in the U.S. Tell us a little bit about that.
Right. So this notion of King Cotton is all premised on the cotton industry being the central sector of the American economy. And what the 1619 Project and its contributing authors do is they try to prove this empirically. And one of the stats that Matthew Desmond cites comes from this book by New History of Capitalism author by the name of Ed Baptist. And he says, between 1800 and the Civil War, cotton production grew by 400%, which it absolutely did. We know that from evidence of the growth of the American economy, and it's a big growing sector. And he says also, the cotton sector intersects with all sorts of other aspects of the economy. You have to pay to ship the cotton. There are insurers that have policies extended to the plantations and their crops. There are textile mills that use cotton as an input to make cloth and clothing and all sorts of other products. So he tries to trace how cotton spreads across the entire American economy. And in so doing, he tries to add it all up and says, okay, how big of a sector of the U.S. economy is affected either directly or indirectly by cotton? And he does these calculations in his book, and then he gets to this point where he claims 50% of the American economy before the Civil War is tainted by cotton. The problem is he didn't do his math right, so he added all these things up in the numerator, and it's just back to basic division from that most people learn in elementary school. So he adds everything up in the numerator. He doesn't do the same adjustment in the denominator, because if you say we're going to calculate the share of cotton that's connected to steamboat shipping, you actually have to do that for every single other sector of the economy if you want to make that calculation. And it turns out that he's inflated the numerator and gotten to 50% without correcting his denominator. So what I do is in the book is I call attention to other research that actually goes into the real statistics, the properly done calculations. And what it turns out is, if you look in the 1830s or 1840s, right before the Civil War, cotton makes up between 6 or 7% of the U.S. economy, not 50% of the U.S. economy. So right then and there, you've got this whole school of historical thought that's premised on a math error, and yet it's being trumpeted as if it's this great breakthrough that's demonstrated that all of capitalism is linked to slavery.
Now, you're not completely critical of Nikole Hannah-Jones because you talk a bit about her views on Abraham Lincoln, which because so much of of history has been almost a hagiography of Abraham Lincoln, but he was a little more conflicted than that.
Exactly. So early in the 1619 Project, this is the first version of it that comes out in 2019, Nikole Hannah-Jones, she gets into trouble with all these crazy claims about the American Revolution, but one area where she actually got some of the facts right and unfairly came under criticism is during the American Civil War. Lincoln, he's famous for being the great emancipator, and all due credit to him for ending slavery. He is genuinely an anti-slavery guy, but his political views were complicated on the issue because he didn't know what a post-slavery society in the United States was going to look like. And what he ends up doing is entertaining all of these projects that say, well, what if we pay to ship the freed slaves back to Liberia on the coast of Africa? Or maybe we can send them to Central America and the American tropics. We can colonize them abroad. And it's there in the record. Lincoln gives speeches on it, writes letters, actually obtains $600,000 in congressional funding to launch this program, which is a big number in those days. It's a major national program. And this is part of Lincoln's legacy. Now, it never comes to fruition because he's assassinated and at the end of the war, and we don't know what his second term would have been. But Nikole Hannah-Jones draws attention to this and says, well, there are some complexities to Lincoln's racial views, and we need to incorporate this into the story and our understanding of how the emancipation story played out. And she came under fire because, again, it's the hagiography. It's the great emancipator narrative of Lincoln doesn't like this story. So I actually rose to her defense early on. And said, wait a minute, she's actually got some of the history correct here, and we should investigate these facts. And not only did I do that, I'm an economic historian who works on slavery. One of my earlier books is specifically about Lincoln's colonization programs. It came out in 2011 called Colonization After Emancipation. And it's an investigation of what happened during the Civil War. So I not only that, was I defending her, I'm probably one of the world's main experts on this exact topic. So I wrote a short piece that turned into one of the chapters in the book, correcting the historical record on there. But it gets complex after that because first Nikole Hannah-Jones comes under fire for this. She starts to defend herself. And she starts to defend herself.
Hold that thought. We'll come back after the break. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we're back with our last segment with Dr. Phil Magness of the Independent Institute. And Dr. Magness, you were talking about how Nicole Hannah-Jones was defending herself before we had to take a quick break.
Absolutely. So this is the issue about Abraham Lincoln's colonization programs in the Civil War, where she came under fire on that. So she starts to defend herself, and this is in late 2019, early 2020. And one of the things she does is she reveals that she based her arguments off of my book, Colonization After Emancipation. She tweets out a link to it on Amazon, and she points to an article I had written in 2014 in the New York Times, her own newspaper, about this aspect of Lincoln's post-slavery plans and projects that he was endeavoring. And she says, no, my critics are wrong. Here's the scholarship. It shows that Abraham Lincoln was indeed pursuing colonization. And someone points out to her that these articles and books that she just pointed to and tweeted and cited were written by me, a critic of other aspects of the 1619 Project. Oops. So I got sent down the memory hole. She deletes all the tweets, and suddenly I'm persona non grata. And in a later version, the book version of the 1619 Project, when it comes out in print, that section has been removed and replaced by a link to Ibram X. Kendi.
How do you respond to people who say, well, yes, that was Lincoln was thinking that way initially, but he evolved over the war and really moved away from the notion of the colonization?
Yeah. Well, this is the evidence I put forth in my book and my scholarship. I actually trace up to the very end of Lincoln's presidency. There's an ongoing, continued discussion about how to colonize the slaves abroad. I show in 1863 he launches a project in what is now modern-day Belize in Central America. I show in 1864 and 1865 Lincoln is involved in all these political battles because Congress is trying to reclaim or repeal some of the funding that they had given him to do this, and there's a big legislative fight. And then I show at the very end of his life, even perhaps right up to the moment before he heads out to Ford's Theater, he's in discussions with top officials about, well, the war's over now. What do we do as our reconstruction plan, and maybe colonization should be a part of that.
Now, we've been talking about history, so how did the American Historical Association respond to all this back and forth?
Unfortunately, very, very poorly. So a couple of years after the 1619 Project comes out, James Sweet, who was the president of the AHA at the time, wrote in his monthly newsletter column for the organization a critique of the use of politics in historical writing. And this is a nonpartisan critique. It says Republicans misuse politics, Democrats misuse politics, and he gave examples, including the 1619 Project. And says, there are historical errors here that have been manipulated, and the truth has been bent to support a political agenda, and so this is bad practice. Very uncontroversial point. But then the social media Twitter mob, which was a very left-wing site at the time, assembles, and within hours of this thing going live on the website, there's a whole thread of just angry left-wing historians demanding this guy's resignation. And in the course of 48 hours, the organization, the AHA, basically pushes him into doing an apology statement because he harmed people by criticizing the 1619 Project. So it's just a complete repudiation of scholarly integrity by the organization in exchange for propping up this political outrage machine that was all built around the political narrative of the 1619 Project, not historical truth and evidence.
Have classrooms been teaching the 1619 Project? Is there material out there for them to do that? How should classrooms respond to this issue?
Yeah. So unfortunately, this is another element of it. The New York Times rolled out a pre-made K through 12 grade school curriculum, and it's lined up side by side with each chapter of the 1619 Project, and then they finally do a Hulu documentary series that you can show in the classroom. And I'm not opposed to reading the 1619 Project as a method of historical debate, but their curriculum, it's all this one-sided narrative. It's like the 1619 Project is the only basis of truth in American history. And if you teach that and nothing else, and you don't show that there have been substantive serious scholarly criticisms that have found factual errors in the 1619 project, students aren't going to be exposed to that. So I've been a proponent all along from this debate. It's like, okay, if you use the 1619 project in the classroom, you also need to show some of the essays that walk through the errors in the 1619 project. Let students evaluate it, critically think about it, and make up their own minds.
Has there been any effort to do a sort of a similar thing from the anti-1619 project, a series of essays or a small book or something that could be made available to teachers in K through 12?
Well, one of the closest things is my book. The 1619 Project Myth is kind of a companion volume, in a way, to the original 1619 project, because it does walk through and survey the problems. It offers also some alternative perspectives on a lot of the issues that are involved, and I'd want people to read it side by side. And, we made it available, priced it right to where this could be adopted or used as a classroom supplement. Also, many of the essays are available online free of charge or with a minimal paywall and things like that. And I would encourage students that are interested in this subject matter to read them side by side and evaluate them, because I'm confident that I think the scholarly side will come out all the better for it by having that criticism engaged.
Have you done a sort of a journal, not a journal, but an article which sort of summarizes all the arguments? Because many of the arguments in your book address certain aspects of it, so you'd have to hit several of them. Is there anything that just kind of coalesces it all that a teacher could say, I'm just going to print this off and hand it out to my class?
Yes. So I actually wrote very early on is a long-form essay that tackles about 4 or 5 of the major myths of the 1619 project. And it says, okay, well, here's what the 1619 project says. Here are what the critics say. Let's evaluate the evidence side by side. And it walks through the American Revolution. It walks through Lincoln and the Civil War. It walks through the economics of King Cotton. And, I tried to be very even-handed and fair. And I said, okay, here's where the critics have the upper hand. Here's where Nicole Hannah-Jones said something right. Let's give her credit for that. Here's where there's an interpretive error. And
where is there a link people could go to get a look at that?
Yeah, so we actually have that on our website on independent.org, and the original version came out on the American Institute for Economic Research's website, which is AIER.org.
Well,
I think they're both freely available.
I'm going to encourage our listeners to go there to Independent Institute and the American of Economic Research, also that website. And you can find out more about Dr. Magness on our website at pointofview.net. He's done a number of things. Dr. Magness, in the minute and a half we have left, what's next for you? What's the next project?
Oh, all sorts of things. So the American 250th anniversary is coming up next year, 1776, 2026. And right now we're working on an issue of our journal, the Independent Review, that is a historical retrospective on that event. And we're looking at what caused the revolution, where were the tax revolts, how do they lead to it, what are some of the legacies and political events that come out of the revolution. So we're probably going to release that right around July 4th of next year and make it publicly available.
That would be good. It would be better if it could be released before that. We'd like to have that when we're looking at the 4th of July coming up.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
When we come back, we're going to turn to a different book. This is called The Legacy of Hope. It's about the Jewish experience in Bulgaria during World War II. It's about the government's and Hitler's attempts to try to get them expelled from Bulgaria and into the camps, and about a rabbi who becomes a Christian in all of this. So stay with us. We'll be back on Point of View.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. by the fact you're here listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I do appreciate Point of View and what you folks are doing. You really are doing a great job to educate and to help Christian folks do a better job to honor Christ in all that we do.
My husband and I are your supporters. We just really appreciate the show and the people you bring on.
I just want to commend you guys on your program. I love listening to you. It's a blessing. Been listening to you for several years. Your program has helped my family see current events and elections and politics through the eyes and the principles of Scripture. And that's been enlightening, and we're trying to pass that on to others.
I want to say, first of all, that I really enjoyed the Millennial Roundtable, and I love the program altogether. I think Kirby is great, and I really appreciate all of y'all, all that y'all do, and the truth that y'all put out.
Hey, great show. Love all your comments and what you're talking about.
Thanks again for what you do.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Dr. Merrill Matthews.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm Merrill Matthews, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today, and we're changing directions. We're going from U.S. history now to European history. In a book that I just found fascinating, very, very interesting and inspiring at the same time. It's called The Legacy of Hope: Hidden Heroes from a Generation to Generation. It's by Avi Mizrahi, I believe it is, and he is an author who wrote about. There's really three stories here in this book. One about Bulgaria during the war and Bulgaria's attempt to preserve the Jews and keep them from being deported to Polish death camps. It's a successful story. We don't hear that often, but they had some success there in Bulgaria, both from a Christian and a Jewish rabbi who eventually becomes a Christian. We're also it also moves from there to Israel after the war and what happens to the rabbi in Israel, and then to something of the life of the author of the book. And it's a compelling story. Joining us by phone is the author's daughter, Devorah. She serves as director of the Dugit Ministries in Israel. She played a significant role in the research for the book and The Legacy of Hope: Hidden Heroes from Generation to Generation. And she also holds a master's degree in political science and international relations from the Hebrew University. Also joining us by phone, Lorna Cajina. She is the director of Dugit USA, and she coordinates fundraising and so forth for their ministry. So, Devorah, Lorna, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Well, let's start with Devorah here. Tell us a little bit now. Your father decided to write this book. What sort of inspired him to write this? Because this is about his history and then the history as it moves forward.
Yes. So my grandparents didn't really talk to him when he was growing up of what they experienced during World War II and during the Holocaust. They didn't start talking until us girls, we are four girls, four sisters. We have this project at school. It's called the Roots Project, when we're 12, when we're coming to our bat mitzvah age. Mm-hmm. And it's a project that you go and you ask your grandparents, if you have great-grandparents, and you try and find out about your family's history. And you write a written project, and you present it in front of the class. So we started asking questions about how it was like before World War II and during World War II. And each time my sister came and it was time for her to write this project, we started to find out there was such an amazing story that happened in Bulgaria that needed to be researched. And that kind of triggered for my father how to really investigate. What is this whole story? How come a nation that was allied with the Nazi Germany, with the Third Reich, was able to save 50,000 Jews from destruction?
You know, the story is about Bulgaria, and as I mentioned, there's really three stories here. What's going on in Bulgaria during the war, after the war, when Rabbi Daniel Zion moves to Israel, and then your father's own experience and your family's experience. But let's start with the war. Bulgaria is one of the Balkan states. It's on the Black Sea. It is south of Ukraine. You have Ukraine, then you have Romania, and then you have Bulgaria, and it's north of Greece. Tell us about what was happening in Bulgaria at the time, because most of the stories we hear about Jews during the war are tragic stories. This has a little bit better ending than most of them.
Yes, definitely. So in Bulgaria, you can see that all the laws and all the different stages that you have in other countries also happen in Bulgaria. Mm-hmm. They have something that's like the Nuremberg laws. They have Jews that are marked with the yellow star, yellow pin. My grandfather remembers putting it on. His education was stopped because a Jewish boy wasn't allowed to have education. Our family shop was taken away because Jewish people couldn't have property. So many things happened in Bulgaria like in the other countries. But there's a big, big but in this. What happened was that during the war, it was actually the Orthodox Church, that's the biggest church in Bulgaria. The metropolis, who are the heads of the church, got together and they decided that they were going to do whatever they could in order to save their Jewish population.
And we should mention that Bulgaria tried to remain neutral a little while, but eventually became part of the Axis powers, and so was in some ways under Hitler's authority.
Yes, but also don't forget that also they were still in power. There was still the king who was in charge of Bulgaria. They didn't fled or leave Bulgaria. And also, you can know in the government themselves, Bulgarian government themselves, there were a lot of pro-Nazis that were in official positions during this time. So there was very much a deep connection during World War II with Nazi Germany. So
Tsar Boris III is the ruler, the king, the czar at the time, and he tries to limit the participation. And even as he's getting pressure from Hitler to do something, he comes out as something of a hero in his efforts to try to minimize the damage.
I'll tell you what. It's I believe that he was persuaded. And one decision, one person who didn't stand up in the right time and talk to him, I believe that his decision could have been different. Mm-hmm. So in my perspective, I believe it was actually key figures like Metropolis Stefan and like Rabbanan Zion, who actually in the end convinced the king to revoke his decision not to deport the Jews, because we do know that he did give the first order to deport the 8,000 Bulgarian Jews in March 9th, 1943. But because of their persuasion and because they were able to influence him, he revoked that decision.
Right, and the real story here is Metropolitan Stefan, and Metropolitan is a term in the Bulgarian Orthodox Church, similar to what we might call as a bishop. And then Rabbi Zion, they organize people to really respond to what's happening and they create something of a pressure campaign that is successful in getting pushback.
That is correct. Yes, they do.
And go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it does. For me, it's really mind-blowing when you read the protocols of all these Christian leaders sitting down in 1941, 1942, 1943, where so many Jewish people were slaughtered during this time. And you see this country with the church leaders sitting down and saying that they have to do whatever they can in order to open their church doors to rescue the Jewish people. They even go so far as quote Romans 11, saying that we are grafted into the Jewish people. And if we don't save them in their time of need, then how would they know their Messiah, their Christ? if we don't stand up and do what's right.
Hold on. We'll come back in just a minute.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Matt Taibbi worked for many years as a contributing editor for Rolling Stones and is now a publisher of Racket News. After the horrible news of the school shooting in Minneapolis Catholic School, he made an insightful comment about the way the media covers such issues. He said, "You don't know who's crazier, the shooter or some of the people talking about the shooter." His comments seem to sum up all the media commentary that occurs after a tragic event like a mass shooting. First, there is the confusion on the part of the legacy media about motive. Certainly, we don't want to jump to false conclusions, but media practitioners generally default to his motive was unclear. Whether it's a mass shooting or a terrorist attack, my quick answer to motive is simple. The shooter wanted to kill people. In the case of the Minnesota shooter, we have clear indications since the Gun magazine said such things as "Kill Donald Trump," "Israel must fall," and "Where is your God?" These might have been an indication of motive. Second, as soon as the tragedy is announced, one side will talk about the need for more gun control, even though Minnesota has more restrictive gun laws and even a red flag law. The other side might focus on mental health issues. A third side might focus on the need for better school security. And a fourth commentary might lament the increasing amount of visual violence in the media. The cacophony of voices and opinions should be clear indication that there are no simple solutions. But that doesn't stop the media and their experts from expressing them long before the funerals for those who have died at the hands of a deranged shooter. We need to acknowledge that there are no simple solutions, and we need to postpone such discussions and debates a few days after the tragedy. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Critical Race Theory, go to viewpoints.info/CRT.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. We're talking about the book Legacy of Hope, Hidden Heroes from Generation to Generation by Avi Mizrahi, I believe it's pronounced, and his daughter Devorah is on with us, along with Lorna Cajina, who works with the foundation that the Mizrahis have. And Devorah, we're talking about what's happening in Bulgaria at the time, and they're able to come up with a solution. It's hard to talk about these things because none of these are good, but they're not as bad as some of the others. But instead of deporting Jews out of Bulgaria, they end up the Tsar ends up putting them in work projects, and then says we need them here working, and so is able to save thousands of Jews by doing that. So tell us a little bit about that story.
So yes, so the working camps. So that's it's. There's a few theories for the working camps, but one of them is really that he was trying to convince Hitler and the Nazis, saying, no, listen, we need our Jews to build infrastructures, to build roads, to use them as cheap manpower in Bulgaria, and that how try to convince them that they don't need to send them to the death camps. There is a record of a really heated meeting between him and Hitler, and Himmler saying Jews are Jews and they need to die. There's no other solution but to kill them. And then we know that he comes back, and there's this really debate what to do. Do we do what the Nazis want us to do? Or do we keep the Jews? Do we keep some of the Jews? Do we deport some of the Jews? Do we keep them? There's a lot of debating going on, but definitely you can see that was like a strategy that the bullies try to do. Now you do know that also for some, this was just like sort of like almost like a ghetto, a place where they can put they put a lot of Jews in one place, so it'll be easier for them to be deported to the death camps. So it was kind of like a milestone, or like a way to make it easier to get to the final solution. But praise God, that never happened.
So Rabbi Daniel Zion is, I believe, the chief rabbi of Bulgaria, and he is in conversations with Metropolitan Stefan from the Bulgarian Orthodox Church, and they are able to mobilize people. But in all the process, something happens to Daniel Zion as he sees a glowing man. Tell us about that.
Oh, it's a fascinating story. It actually happens before World War II. It happens in the 1930s. Oh. Yes, where they have Metropolitan Stefan and Rabbi Dan Zion will meet here and there to have theological discussions. And in one of those meetings, Metropolitan Stefan gave him the Bible. Now, when I mean the Bible, I mean the whole Bible, the Old Testament with the New Testament together. And Rabbi Daniel looked at that, and he tore out the New Testament, tore it and threw it on the floor, and said, "Now I'll read your book with only the Old Testament." And after a while of debating, something happened to Rabbi Dan Zion. I think he felt guilty or felt bad that he kind of threw this gift on the floor. And he took the pieces of paper, and he said, "You know what, Metropolitan Stefan, I'll take the whole book, and I'll put it in my library." And it kind of collected dust for a while. And all of a sudden, in the middle of his morning prayer, where he's praying to God, all of a sudden a glowing man appears before him and disappears. He doesn't know what to do with this experience. So he goes to his fellow rabbis. They don't have an answer for him. So he says, "You know what? I'll try the Christians. Maybe the Christians have an answer for me." So he goes to Metropolitan Stefan, tells him what he experienced, and Stefan said, "Well, next time this image appears to you, just say, 'Here I am.' In Hebrew, we say, 'Hineni.'" And so for Daniel, that seemed very Jewish. If it was good enough for Samuel, it's good enough for him as a rabbi. So he goes back home, wakes up in the morning, starts again his morning prayer, and this glowing person full of light appears before him. And he says, "Here I am. Who are you?" And the image says, "I am Jesus, Ani Yeshua," and disappears. In that very moment, he realized that Jesus came to him, and he realized that he was the Messiah and the Lord of his life. So he went over to the broken and torn book that he had in his library and just started reading from the New Testament. See, you understand, for Jewish people, that is a forbidden book. It's not for us. It's for non-Jewish people. But he started reading it and seeing that all that he saw was that, oh, this is a good Jewish book with so many scriptures from the Old Testament. It's all based on the Old Testament. And so he decided right there to accept Jesus as his Lord and Savior. And this is what it gets really interesting, because what do? You are a chief rabbi of an entire nation. Do you convert and become part of the Orthodox Church, or do you remain the chief rabbi of your people?
It's got to be a real dilemma.
Yes, for sure, especially in those days. And so he decides to go talk and discuss it with his friend, Metropolis Stefan. And I believe they get it to a very important decision that I believe was critical for World War II. In the end, Stefan says, listen, don't become part of our church. Remain the chief rabbi of the Jewish people and remain with your Jewish identity and believe in Jesus as your Messiah and Lord. So you before we even enter the World War II in 1939 in Europe, you have two main leaders. You have a leader of the Jewish community in this country and another Christian leader, both believe in Jesus, heads of their congregations of this small nation called Bulgaria.
It's an amazing story. Lorna, it's a story that just resonates with people.
Yes, I think for me, the biggest thing is seeing the perspective of the Gentile. In this case, it was Metropolis Stefan who responded and told Rabbi Sion, do not convert. I think that's very important because he kept his Jewish background. He kept his Jewish ethnicity, and to me, I think it just serves as a great example as a Gentile for me, not being Jewish and just seeing that perspective of how to respond and be very compassionate and just be able to honor their Jewish background, his Jewish background.
You know, we see in the history of the war and Hitler's move in Germany from when he becomes chancellor in January 33, I believe, if I remember right, the Christian churches began turning against Jews in many cases, and this is a real struggle in Germany where you have Dietrich Bonhoeffer and others who are trying to fight this change. But here you go to Bulgaria, and the Christians and Jews are open to each other, and they're welcoming, and they're talking and working together.
Yeah, and I think Avi says it so great. He puts it, this is Ephesians 2. This is the one new man that Jesus broke down the wall of hostility for Jew and Gentile to come together and be one. And I think it's a great picture and imagery to what that can look like, where they don't have to leave their ethnicity. And I feel like it's important because it's part of our story too as Gentiles. Like Devorah mentioned, we're grafted in. So I love that part in reading the book and seeing the pieces and the stories, historical context of the book, and then also wanting to be how Metropolis Stefan was such an exemplary person to the Gentiles. I believe they called him righteous among the nations, which means he was righteous among the Gentiles. And it's such an endearing term where, it's endearing. And that was, for me, one of the things that captivated me about the book.
We're talking this hour about the book Legacy of Hope, Hidden Heroes from Generation to Generation. We have a link to that on our website at Point of View. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Point of View.
Point of View has been listener funded for over 50 years, and listeners who give monthly are the lifeblood of this ministry. And that is why we are inviting you to join that special team, the Truth Team. Later this month, we will celebrate Truth Team Week, highlighting the special impact you make when you become a regular supporter of Point of View. Please pray about the investment you can commit as a monthly gift during Truth Team Week. By supporting Point of View, you equip Americans to remain anchored to truth, navigating the tough moral, cultural, and political issues of the day from a biblical perspective. And also, you don't have to wait. You can join us right now. Give or learn more about the Truth Team at pointofview.net. or call us at 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, Dr. Merrill Matthews.
And welcome back to Point of View. We're talking about the new book, Legacy of Hope, Hidden Heroes from Generation to Generation by Avi Mizrahi. And we've got on the phone Devorah, his daughter, who is also the director of the Dugit Ministries in Israel, and Lorna Cajina, who is director of Dugit in the USA. So we've got both of them joining us. And Devorah, you know, when you mentioned Samuel, and I've mentioned the conversion of Rabbi Zion to 2 or 3 people, and when Metropolitan Stephan say, "Here am I," or "Here I am," everybody immediately goes to the Samuel reference, and you mentioned it as well, because it's a striking thing that happens, and it's similar in that sense. But I also, by seeing the glowing light, the glowing man, it also strikes me of Paul's conversion.
Yes, for sure. It's definitely something remarkable that in both stories is definitely amazing.
There is a similarity. Well, eventually the Russians come into Bulgaria in September 1944. The Germans are out now, and so Rabbi Zion eventually moves to Israel, as many Jews were doing at the time. Tell us a little bit about that move.
So yes, after World War II, you know, the families understand what happened to the Jews of Europe. The 6 million Jews were killed, and so something arises within them. Then they believe that they have to go back to their land of their forefathers, the land that they were taken out as slaves, and now need to go back, as is prophesied in the Bible. And it's actually something that even my grandfather shared with me, that he just couldn't explain it. There was something inside him said, it's time for you to go home. Home meaning the land of Israel. And so most of all the Bulgarian population ended up immigrating to the land of Israel. And it's quite remarkable, because those who were saved during World War II were actually very influential and important in the establishment of the State of Israel.
But it wasn't easy for them when they got there.
No, it wasn't at all. So for my grandfather, when he just landed in the shores of Israel after the State of Israel declared independence, he kissed the ground. He was so excited. He said, "For 2,000 years, we've been waiting to come back." And then the Jewish agency said, "Welcome. Here's a gun, go and fight." And that very day, he was enlisted into the IDF, not knowing Hebrew, not knowing how to do anything with a gun, nothing. He had to go and defend the nation, because there were 5 armies who invaded Israel. And so that was his welcome to the land.
Yeah, and I'll just mention that the book goes through and goes through a short history of the War for Independence, the 6-Day War, and some of these, because that's such an integral part of it. But Rabbi Zion eventually begins to, just tell us what happens after the war, how he begins to teach and again.
So he is very much respected. The Bulgarian Jews love him because he was so influential in persuading the king and doing whatever he could to stop the deportations, risking his own life in doing so. So he was very much honored and respected, and they actually wanted him to be one of the chief rabbis of Israel. And he had a synagogue, and a lot of the Bulgarians were going to and being part of the synagogue. But because he was also a believer in Jesus, he would have home groups in his home and teach about Jesus and from the New Testament.
Do the rabbis in Israel know this about him being a believer in Jesus yet?
So in the beginning, they do not. And that's how you can also see how the public opinion, you could say, the newspaper articles and everything in the beginning, up to 1950, 1951, they're very admiring and very honoring of this rabbi. But then in 1950, they find out that there are rumors that he believes in Jesus. And so they actually order him to a court case in the rabbinical court here in Israel. And they say, listen, if you keep it quiet and to yourself, we won't do anything. And he looked at them and he said, I'm not ashamed of my Messiah, of my Lord. And he actually, the story goes that he sings praises to Jesus, to Yeshua, right there in that court. It's almost like how, just think these rabbinical courts, almost like the Pharisees in the time of Jesus. You have to kind of think of how much power these men have. And just seeing him, how he just had the courage and the faith and trust just to say, no, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, and I will share to anyone who wants to hear.
And talk about that a little more, because Christianity was not embraced. Even the fact that there were Christians it was somewhat shunned in Israel because they did not want the Christian influence in there.
Yes, you have to understand history, because again, there's so many stories. I mean, and we know in my family of crusaders and so many things that were done in the name of Christ that were not, like burning Jews alive in synagogues, burning and killing them because they didn't bow to statues of Mary and bow to the cross. And also you have to think, in a Jewish mind, Nazi Germany was a Christian nation. So these are things that are very, very hard for the Jewish person, because there's so much history and hurt you have to go through. So when you're even talking about Jesus or even talking about New Testament, it's very, very hard. It's almost like you're a traitor. You've disowned your family, disowned your heritage. How can you do this? So it was a big, big thing and a big, hard thing for them to accept, that yet he was a rabbi and still Jewish, but yet believed in Jesus. So
how did he goes on the radio and speaks in Hebrew about his faith, and that raises a lot of problems for him too, didn't it?
Yes, it does. It's actually the first document of somebody in Hebrew sharing his testimony and sharing the gospel on national radio station. You understand, in Israel in 1953, there was only one station. So the whole nation heard. And here we have this rabbi in Hebrew, in our mother tongue, speaking and sharing his testimony. So it was definitely, after that, they were very, very angry. And what they did is they ended up taking his title of rabbi from him.
But he still continues to teach and to minister in ways, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. So because the Bulgarian Jews loved him so much and they knew what he sacrificed for them, they still saw him as their rabbi. And they would still talk to him as the rabbi, and they would still go to his synagogue as their rabbi.
And when he finally passed away, there was a lot of people came to that funeral.
Yes. They say about 1,000 came. And you also had an army escort that came, and they gave him a lot of honor, and they buried him in a Jewish cemetery, because they couldn't, even if they didn't agree with his beliefs, they could not put aside what he has done for our people.
And he continued to live as a Jew. I mean, he followed the Old Testament law, he obeyed the commandments, and he never abandoned his Judaism. He said, as I understand it, I am a Jew, but I accept Jesus as my Messiah.
Yes, that's correct. That he was born a Jew, he lived as a Jew, and he died as a Jew. Yes.
Is that hard to do in Israel these days?
Yes. It is very, very hard. Persecution has definitely risen over the years, but we're here to be a part of our people, to be a witness and light, especially now in this dark time we're facing.
We've been talking about the new book, Legacy of Hope, Hidden Heroes from Generation to Generation. When we come back, we want to find out from Lorna a little bit about the Dugit ministry and find out about Devorah, your father, and his own transition as he moves through life and becomes a Christian himself. So you can find out more about the book, and I would encourage you to do so, pointofview.net. I think we have a link to that available on Point of View. And I would encourage you to get this because there's a lot of history, but there's also a lot of inspiring stories in here that I think you will find very interesting. Legacy of Hope, Hidden Heroes from Generation to Generation. You'll find out about Bulgaria and its influence in the war. And it's a story that we haven't heard from many other the European countries that were essentially taken over by Hitler. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back with our final segment, talking about the legacy of hope, hidden heroes from generation to generation. And Lorna, you are head of, did I pronounce it right, Dugit USA?
Yes, Dr. Matthews, it's Dugit USA or Dugit Outreach Ministries.
And tell us about the ministry.
Yes, so our administrative offices are here in the U.S., and then our mission and vision is boots on the ground in Israel. So our mission is to see the nation of Israel saved, and we do that by having outreaches. We do prayer meetings. We have a distribution center where we give out food for the locals, and we're located in Tel Aviv, Israel.
Are you so you're working to convert people in Israel, and that of course that means you're primarily working to convert Jews. Is that correct?
Well, no, not exactly.
Okay.
Yes, we want to see all of Israel saved, but we do that by creating relationships. And the way that we feel that the Lord has called us to is to build relationship with locals. And we do that by giving out, whether you're a believer or not, we give out food. We also have a coffee shop where you can enjoy a cup of coffee. And yeah, if you want information about the New Testament, which normally some people do ask for the New Testament Bibles or Bibles in general, we do have that available. But something very unique to Israel is that it's not so easy to convert.
Yes.
So what we do is we create relationship, and that has been the most fruitful thing that we've done as a ministry, and that has been working for over 30 years, where Avi and Haya Mizraki have built this ministry, and they've seen, the power of Yeshua in that area in Tel Aviv, Israel.
Are you getting a lot of interest in Yeshua?
So it's definitely a gradual interest, but yes, here and there we do get interest. There are believers in the land currently, so they do reach out to our ministries when we're holding events, when we're holding prayer meetings, which we do. And our biggest event, I would say, is our Bat Zion, which is our women's conference. We hold once a year, and we had about 500 to 600 women meet this year. Again, believers in Yeshua in the land, and they just come where they can be. They have a meal. We have a meal prepared for them, and then a time of fellowship and prayer with one another. But it's with that relationship that we reach others that pique interest into, hey, what is Yeshua about? Or, just by connection, they meet Avi and Haya. But yeah, it's definitely, I think evangelism is unique to Israel these days.
And Devorah, your father, Avi, was just a Jew in Israel, but he eventually comes to America for a little while, and he ends up going to a church there. And tell us about that.
Yes, so he flies to America. He has dreams to explore America. He actually wanted to go to Las Vegas and gamble and make money. That's how he thought you make money. But before he goes to Las Vegas, he decides to visit his sister, who was living in Florida at the time. And he goes visits, and he was so happy to see that you have such a long weekend. In Israel, we work 6 days a week, from Sunday to Friday. We only have Saturday as a day of rest. And he found out that in America, they have Saturday and Sunday. So he was like, oh, this is nice. And so he's planning to sleep in on Sunday morning. But then his sister comes and says, I want you to come with me to church. And it's really funny to see them, share this story, because you see my father with his Jewish look saying, excuse him, what? Me, you, church? We're Jewish people. What are you even saying? Are you crazy? And she looks at him and she says, listen, it's not what you think. How about you just come and check it out? And he decides, you know what? She gave me a challenge. I'm going to take my Hebrew Bible, Old Testament only, and I'm going to prove these Christians all wrong. And that's how he goes to church. And so he goes to church, and there's a choir singing, and he says something in worship he could not explain. He felt something in his heart. He felt a love that he never felt before, just by watching people worship God and love God. And when they when they finished the worship, he thought that was it. He was ready to go out. He's never been to a church before service. And my aunt was saying, no, sit down. Now the preacher's going to come. And he actually was so afraid that this person was going to talk about religion. And because he had this image of God that God was on the corner, and every time you were going to do a mistake, it was going to hit you hard. And he was so afraid of this image of God. And it was very simple preacher. He just started sharing from John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, so whoever believes in him should have not perished, but have everlasting life. And he started listening to these words. He's never heard this before. Like I said, the New Testament is a forbidden book. And all of a sudden, he's hearing the Word of God. He's hearing the New Testament read to him. He's hearing love. He's seeing and feeling love. He just couldn't understand it. And there was a battle going on. He talks about how much he was fighting it. He wanted to cry. Here's this strong Israeli person, Jewish person, and he wants to cry. He doesn't understand why. And so he actually runs away, and when the service is finished, and tries to run away from God. But as all of us know, you can't run away from God.
Cannot.
He was also outside the church as well, and he said he just felt the God's presence and the Holy Spirit, and he said he just knew just by seeing Christians love God that he provoked him to jealousy, and that's when he knew that Jesus, Yeshua, was going to become his Savior and Lord.
It's a fabulous story. Is he working on another book? We only have about a minute and a half left, but is he working on something, another project?
No, not right now. Right now we're believing God. We're trying to, all the 8 years or 9 years of research that we've interviewed people along the way.
Yes, there's a lot of interviews in the book.
Yes, so all of them were videoed. So we're hoping to do a movie documentary to make from this.
And that's you're working on that now, or is it finished and about ready to come out?
No, we're working at it right now as we speak. We're working on it. We're almost halfway there.
Good. I'm looking forward to it. And Lorna, Devorah, thank you both for joining us. It is a great, inspiring story that we have here. We get history and we get inspiration at the same time. And Devorah, Lorna, make sure you let us know when the movie's done, because we want to have you back.
Thank you. It'll be an honor.
Thank you. And if you want to find out more, go to pointofview.net. I think we have a link to the book there. It is really a very good, intriguing read. Had trouble putting it down in several places. And I want to thank Megan in there for engineering, Steve for producing this program. Thank you for listening. And when you go to pointofview.net, you'll see the donate button there. I encourage you to push that button and give to Point of View. Point of View will be back tomorrow.
In 19th century London, two towering historical figures did battle, not with guns and bombs, but words and ideas. London was home to Karl Marx, the father of communism, and legendary Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon. London was in many ways the center of the world, economically, militarily, and intellectually. Marx sought to destroy religion, the family, and everything the Bible supports. Spurgeon stood against him, warning of socialism's dangers. Spurgeon understood Christianity is not just religious truth, it is truth for all of life. Where do you find men with that kind of wisdom to stand against darkness today? Get the light you need on today's most pressing issues delivered to your inbox when you sign up for the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Every weekday in less than 2 minutes, you'll learn how to be a person of light to stand against darkness in our time. It's free, so visit pointofview.net/signup right now. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.